the ANC is looking incredibly shaky right now. I think it's going to be very difficult to pull out of this dive.
Can South Africa's various cities be governed effectively? Well, joining me to discuss this question is Nicholas Lorimer. He is with the Institute of Race Relations. Nicholas, we have new minority governments in a number of South Africa's metros. How stable will these be, and can they actually govern effectively?
What I think we can say for sure is that these governments are going to be extremely unstable. None of the parties have any kind of formal, strong coalition to be able to hold themselves in government. The one exception perhaps is Tshwane, where the DA, ASA, and the Freedom Front Plus seem to be cooperating much better than the rest of the country. But as for Ekurhuleni, as for Joburg, and pretty much all these other municipalities, they could fall at any time. And the result is going to be an enormous amount of chaos and an enormous amount of political opportunism. This is made worse by the fact that there are so many very small parties, which in some cases actually hold the power to topple governments, even if they just have a single seat. And the more parties you have in the mix, the more difficult it is to keep everyone on the same page.
Enjoying this analysis? Click here to sign up for our 30-day free trial for more content from the CIA.
We're recording at about 4:30 on Wednesday, Nicholas, and the votes for eThekwini are still coming in. But that really stands out as an example of what you've just spoken about. I think there's something like 14 parties there that have a single seat in that council. So that's going to be like herding cats. But you mentioned ASA, and I was a bit curious about the strategy that they've adopted. They seem to have, at the last minute, fallen in line with supporting the DA speakers and mayors in Joburg and Tshwane as well. But it seemed rather reluctant to do that during the week leading up to that announcement. And Herman Mashaba in public was saying he only did this because he feared that the DA would hand the city to the ANC, which seemed a bit incredible to me. What is your view on ASA's strategy approaching these negotiations?
I think it's a little bit difficult to say. I get the feeling that ASA was perhaps, despite some of the things that Mashaba has said, I think they were caught a little bit by surprise by the EFF's decision to support the DA in these metros. And that in particular was difficult for them because it meant that they had to support the DA mayors as well in places like Joburg or Ekurhuleni, because if the EFF had done it and ASA hadn't, then they may have taken the blame for letting the ANC back in power. And Mashaba had been setting up the DA to take the blame on that, saying that the DA had handed these metros back to the ANC. So once it became clear that the EFF was going to be backing the DA mayors without any coalition agreement, ASA kind of had to fall in line on that one. I also think perhaps, though, that ASA might recognize the degree to which these metros or these municipalities in general are ungovernable. The parties do not agree on an enormous number of things. If in a lot of these places, the EFF and the DA have completely opposite policy prescriptions for how to fix some of the problems that are plaguing the municipalities. And so whoever's in charge is not really going to be able to get much done. And they're probably going to take blame and reputational hits for that. So it's possible that ASA might have thought to themselves, well, if we put the DA in charge in these municipalities, they're really going to suffer the consequences in the long term, and we'll come out looking better because we both stood up to the ANC, and at the same time, we haven't taken the reputational damage that came from being in government, like the DA.
And what do you make of the IFP? Because at one point, they made an announcement that they were going to side with the ANC in KZN. But then when it came time to voting in a couple of key municipalities, actually did the opposite and ended up supporting DA candidates. What's going on with the IFP?
I think it's a little bit difficult to say for sure. The party is not well covered by the media in general, but it does seem clear that there is some sort of split or factional divide in the IFP. National IFP gave assurances to the ANC that they would make these kind of coalition agreements across KZN, and that they would establish IFP ANC governments. And yet when it came time to actually do the vote, the IFP pretty much across the board in KZN voted solidly for anyone who was at ANC, mostly the DA, but also some other parties as well, or the DA cooperates with them to have themselves elected as mayors in places like Newcastle and Richards Bay. So the IFP, I think, is probably divided against itself. We'll need to see more of what comes up, but that seems to be the situation right now. And I'm not terribly surprised. A lot of the people on the ground in KZN who are members of the IFP have had very bitter conflicts, often violent, with the ANC going back decades. And going into bed with the ANC, I think, was never going to be a popular move with the party. So I wouldn't be surprised if there was a little bit of a local revolt against the coalition deal with the ANC.
And what about the EFF? Because in many ways, their strategy since 2016 is to stay out of government and try to use their, albeit small, share of the vote for maximum leverage. So trying to disrupt proceedings, also withhold support on key issues like passing budgets and so on. Do you think that their strategy is to potentially threaten to dissolve some of these minority governments if they don't get what they want, say at the national level?
So I think that's very likely the case. The EFF have managed to leverage their small numbers. They didn't have a great election, but they have enough in places that matter to sort of wield the power. And that means that in places like Joburg, Ekurhuleni, the EFF can basically collapse a government whenever they want. So they have effectively showed the ANC. Originally, of course, the EFF discussed going into coalition with the ANC, and they said, you know, we have all these cardinal pillars that we want you to implement, and all of these were mostly sort of national demands of the EFF about nationalizing industries, about adopting their version of land custodianship when it comes to expropriation without compensation, and of doing things like removing destem from the national anthem. So the EFF was rejected in these demands. And the ANC said, no, you have to make demands at local government level. You can't just make national demands. And I think what the EFF has done here is they've said, right, well, we're going to just show you how weak your position really is these days. The ANC assumed that because it was still the biggest party in a lot of these metros, that it would still be able to maintain the mayorships just because the DA would never go into coalition with the EFF. What the EFF has showed is that they have a much longer strategic horizon. They're willing to put the DA in for a time, especially because the DA won't be able to accomplish much in these metros, to show the ANC that they mean business and that the ANC is going to have to come back to the negotiating table. If the ANC doesn't come back to the negotiating table, then I think the EFF hopes to do what they did in 2016, which is basically kind of govern from the opposition benches, and that they can extract serious concessions from whoever's in charge in exchange for not collapsing the government. And it's going to take a lot of willpower from the DA in most of these municipalities to resist that temptation and stick by themselves to avoid falling into the traps they did in 2016.
And is this the death knell of the ANC?
I mean, you know, they say a week is a long time in politics, and much more so a couple of years, but the ANC is looking incredibly shaky right now. I think it's going to be very difficult to pull out of this dive. The ANC has been declining for a while now, and this seems to only be accelerating as they get weaker. There's yet more factions fighting, there's more splits, there's more voters deserting them. I think that the ANC is going to have a very difficult time surviving as anything like a majority party in 2024, and that it's going to have to rely on various coalition partners, the EFF, the principal among them, but other tiny parties as well might be key to them securing a majority in 2024.
Nicholas Lorimer, thank you very much for joining us on the CRA. Let's hand over to you, our viewers. How stable will these new governments be? Can they deliver services effectively enough given the instability that will undoubtedly follow? Leave your thoughts in the comments section below. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. My name is David Ansara. Until next time, take care.